For 8 months, Grace Williams, a black single mother, worked 22 hours a day, 3 jobs. One reason, her son Marcus was dying of leukemia. Her white night shift boss treated her like dirt, made her redo clean floors, threw trash at her feet. People like you should be grateful for any job, he said with a smirk. Grace never fought back. She couldn't afford to, until the night she collapsed at 3 a.m., bleeding hands on the cold floor. Then Jesus walked through those office doors. And the transformation that followed left everyone speechless. The fluorescent lights of Memorial Hermann Hospital buzzed with that persistent electric hum that Grace Williams had learned to tune out over the past 8 months. It was 6:47 a.m., 13 minutes before her shift officially ended, but Grace was already pushing her cleaning cart toward the storage closet on the fourth floor. She had learned that those 13 minutes could mean the difference between catching the 7:15 bus or waiting another 40 minutes for the next one. And 40 minutes meant being late to her second job. Being late meant getting written up. Getting written up meant possibly losing that job. And losing any job meant Marcus wouldn't get his next treatment. Everything in Grace's life had become a mathematical equation of time and money, where every minute and every dollar had to be accounted for with the precision of a surgeon. Except Grace Williams wasn't a surgeon. She was a 45-year-old black woman from the 3rd Ward who cleaned hospital floors for $11 an hour. "Grace, you missed a spot near room 437, called out Sandra, the floor supervisor, a woman whose greatest joy in life seemed to be finding fault in other people's work. Grace turned around, even though her lower back was screaming in protest. She had been on her feet since 7 a.m. the previous morning, with only a 2-hour break for sleep between her third and first jobs. 22 hours of work, 2 hours of sleep, that had been her schedule for the past 8 months. "Yes, ma'am, I'll get it right away," Grace responded with the kind of gentle compliance she had perfected over decades of service work. No attitude, no pushback, no visible exhaustion, just quiet, efficient obedience. She pushed her cart back down the hallway, her worn sneakers squeaking softly against the linoleum she had already mopped twice. The spot Sandra mentioned was barely visible, a small streak near the water fountain that could have easily been overlooked. But Sandra never overlooked anything when it came to Grace. As she bent down to clean the already clean floor, Grace felt her phone vibrate in her pocket. She didn't need to check it to know what the notification said. It was the automatic reminder from Marcus's medical portal: treatment payment due in 3 days. Amount outstanding $8,247. That number had been burned into Grace's mind since she received the call from the hospital's billing department last week. $8,247. It might as well have been 8 million. Grace finished the unnecessary cleaning, returned her cart to the storage closet, punched out exactly at 7 a.m., and speed-walked toward the bus stop 3 blocks away. Her body moved on autopilot, muscle memory guiding her through the same route she had taken every single day for the past year. Down the stairs because the elevator was too slow, through the side exit because it was closer to the bus stop, past the coffee shop where doctors and nurses grabbed their morning lattes that cost more than Grace made in an hour. She made it to the bus stop with 2 minutes to spare, collapsing onto the metal bench with a barely suppressed groan. Her feet throbbed inside her cheap sneakers, the kind that wore out every 6 weeks but were all she could afford. An elderly black woman sitting next to her glanced over with knowing eyes. "Long shift, baby?" the woman asked with that particular Houston warmth that made even strangers feel like family. "Yes, ma'am," Grace replied, managing a tired smile, "but God is good. God is good all the time." The woman responded automatically, the call and response of black church culture. "You look like you carrying the weight of the world on those shoulders." Grace's smile became more genuine, touched by the stranger's concern. "Just carrying what the Lord gives me to carry, ma'am. My son, he's sick. Leukemia. So I work and I pray, and I trust that God's got a plan." The elderly woman reached over and squeezed Grace's hand, her weathered fingers warm and soft. "What's your boy's name, baby?" "Marcus. He's 12 years old." "Marcus," the woman repeated, as if committing the name to memory for her prayers. "The Lord sees you, Grace. He sees every tear, every sacrifice, every moment you want to give up but you don't. You keep carrying that weight, and He'll carry you. You hear me?" Grace felt tears prick her eyes but blinked them back. She couldn't afford to cry, not now, not on the bus where people could see. She had to stay strong. She had to keep moving. "Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate that more than you know." The bus pulled up with a hydraulic hiss, and Grace boarded, scanning her reduced fare card and finding a seat near the back. The ride to her second job took 35 minutes through morning Houston traffic, and Grace used every single one of those minutes to close her eyes and rest. Not sleep, exactly, but a kind of suspended consciousness where her body could briefly stop moving while her mind remained alert enough to wake up at her stop. At 8:02 a.m., Grace walked through the employees' entrance of Burger Palace, a fast food restaurant off Highway 59, where she worked the breakfast and lunch rush. She changed into her uniform in the bathroom, splashed cold water on her face, and tied her hair back into a neat bun. By 8:15, she was at her station, taking orders with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Welcome to Burger Palace, what can I get started for you today?" The words came out automatic, cheerful, the voice of someone who wasn't currently running on fumes and desperation. Customer after customer, order after order, hour after hour, breakfast sandwiches, hash browns, coffee, orange juice. The smell of grease and processed meat that would cling to her clothes and hair long after her shift ended. "Grace, you're moving too slow," snapped Jeremy, the 23-year-old assistant manager who had been given authority he hadn't earned and wielded it like a weapon. "We've got a line building up. Pick up the pace." Grace glanced at the line. There were 4 people waiting, hardly a crisis. But she nodded and said, "Yes sir, I'll move faster." "Because that's what you said when you needed the job more than the job needed you. That's what you said when you were a 45-year-old black woman in Houston, Texas, working 3 jobs to save your dying son." Her shift at Burger Palace ended at 3 p.m. Grace had exactly 45 minutes to take 2 buses across town to make it to her 3rd job, the night shift that started at 3:45 p.m. She usually had time to grab a quick meal from the Burger Palace kitchen, food that employees got at a discount. Today she got a grilled chicken sandwich and a small fries, eating mechanically as she waited for her first bus. The food tasted like cardboard, but food wasn't about taste anymore. It was about fuel, about keeping her body functioning for another shift, another day, another payment toward Marcus's mountain of medical bills.
The second bus was late. Grace watched the minutes tick by on her phone with growing anxiety. 3:37 p.m., 3:41 p.m., 3:44 p.m. The bus finally arrived at 3:47, and Grace practically ran the 2 blocks to Coleman Commercial Cleaning Services, the company that contracted her out to clean office buildings throughout downtown Houston. She burst through the door at 3:58 p.m., 2 minutes before her shift started. "Cutting it close, Grace," said Rita at the front desk, not unkindly. Rita was a Filipino woman in her 50s who had worked for Coleman for 15 years and had seen hundreds of desperate people cycle through the company's revolving door of low-wage labor. "I'm sorry, Rita. The bus was late," Grace panted, already heading toward the changing room to grab her cleaning supplies. "Your assignment tonight is the Westheimer Tower, floors 15 through 22. Richard is the supervisor on duty." Rita's voice had changed slightly when she said Richard's name, a subtle warning that Grace had learned to recognize over the past 3 months. Grace's stomach tightened, but she kept her expression neutral. "Thank you, Rita. I'll head over there now." The Westheimer Tower was a gleaming monument to corporate wealth in downtown Houston, 35 floors of glass and steel that housed law firms, investment companies, and consulting agencies. The kind of building where the people who worked during the day made more in an hour than Grace made in a week. And at night, when all those important people went home to their families and their comfortable lives, people like Grace came in to erase the evidence of their existence. Empty trash cans, vacuum carpets, clean toilets, wipe down conference tables. Make everything pristine and perfect so that when the important people returned in the morning, they could continue believing that the world simply maintained itself. Grace arrived at the Westheimer Tower at 4:32 p.m. and took the service elevator to the 15th floor. The building was already mostly empty, just a few late workers packing up their briefcases and heading out. By 6 p.m. it would be completely deserted except for the cleaning crew and the night security guard. Well, look who finally decided to show up." The voice came from behind Grace before she even had a chance to get her bearings on the 15th floor. Richard Coleman stood leaning against the reception desk, arms crossed, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. He was a white man in his early 30s, the kind of guy who had probably been good-looking in high school and still traded on those fading looks despite the beer gut beginning to push against his supervisor's polo shirt. He had gotten the job through his uncle who owned part of the cleaning company, and he exercised his minimal authority with maximum cruelty. "Good evening, Mr. Coleman," Grace said quietly, setting down her supply cart and pulling out her assignment sheet. "Rita said floors 15 through 22 tonight." "Oh, Rita said that, did she?" Richard pushed off from the desk and walked slowly toward Grace, invading her personal space in a way that made her want to step back, but she stood her ground, keeping her eyes respectfully lowered. Well, I'm the supervisor on duty, and I say you're starting on 22 and working your way down. The executive suites on 22 need extra attention. Apparently they had some big meeting today and the place is trashed. Grace nodded. It didn't matter where she started. She had 8 floors to clean before her shift ended at midnight. Yes sir, I'll head up there right away. Oh, and Grace, Richard called out as she pushed her cart toward the elevator. Don't half-ass it like you did last week. I had complaints about the bathrooms on 19. If I have to redo your work, there will be consequences. Understood? Grace felt heat rise in her face, but she kept her voice level. Yes sir, I understand. I'll make sure everything is perfect. People like you should be grateful for any job, Richard said, his voice casual, conversational, as if he were commenting on the weather. In this economy with your situation, you're lucky Coleman Services was willing to take a chance on you. Grace's hands tightened around the handle of her cleaning cart, but she couldn't respond, because Richard was right about one thing: she couldn't afford to lose this job. This third job paid $13 an hour, $2 more than the hospital, and she worked 7 hours a night, 5 nights a week. That was an extra $455 a week, almost $2,000 a month. Without this job, she would fall even further behind on Marcus's treatments. So she swallowed her pride, nodded one more time, and pushed her cart into the service elevator. Only when the elevator doors closed did she allow herself to lean against the wall and close her eyes for just a moment. Lord, give me strength, she whispered. I can't do this on my own. I need you. Marcus needs you. Please God, I'm so tired. The elevator dinged at the 22nd floor, and Grace straightened up, composing herself. The executive suite was indeed a mess. Coffee cups on every surface, food wrappers overflowing from trash cans, conference rooms with whiteboards covered in diagrams and projections that probably represented millions of dollars in business deals. Grace got to work. She started with the trash, moving methodically from office to office, emptying bins, wiping down desks, organizing scattered papers into neat piles. Then she moved to the conference rooms, erasing whiteboards, cleaning the massive tables that probably cost more than Grace made in a year. She vacuumed the carpets, paying special attention to the high-traffic areas near the elevator and the main conference room. She cleaned the break room, scrubbing the sink until it gleamed, wiping down the expensive espresso machine, organizing the gourmet snacks in the cabinets. By the time she finished the 22nd floor, it was 8:17 p.m. She had been working for almost 13 straight hours, and her body was beginning to shut down. Her feet felt like they were walking on broken glass. Her lower back had progressed from a dull ache to sharp, stabbing pains every time she bent over. Her hands were raw from the cleaning chemicals, small cracks in her skin that burned when she sweated. She moved down to the 21st floor and continued her work. Richard appeared periodically, checking her progress, always finding something to criticize. You missed a spot on the mirror in the bathroom. This trash can still has some residue at the bottom. Did you even vacuum under the desks? I can see dust. Grace redid whatever he pointed out, never arguing, never complaining, because complaining meant being labeled as having an attitude, and black women with attitudes didn't keep their jobs long, no matter how good their work was. At 10:47 p.m., Grace was on the 18th floor, her second to last floor for the night. She was moving slower now, her body forcing her to take breaks she couldn't afford. She would lean against a desk for 30 seconds, just long enough to let the black spots clear from her vision, then push herself to keep going. Just 2 more floors, just 2 more hours. Then she could go home, see Marcus for 30 minutes before he had to sleep, and catch 2 hours of rest herself before starting the whole cycle again. She was cleaning the bathroom on the 18th floor when she heard footsteps approaching. She knew without looking that it was Richard. He always walked with a particular swagger, the gait of someone who knew he had power over others and enjoyed using it.
Grace, 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 Richard said, appearing in the bathroom doorway. He was holding a cup of coffee, and Grace noticed his eyes were slightly unfocused. He'd been drinking. She could smell the alcohol mixing with the coffee. You know what your problem is? Grace continued scrubbing the sink, not making eye contact. No, sir. Your problem is you're lazy. You people always are. You want everything handed to you, but you don't want to put in the real work. He took a sip of his spiked coffee and leaned against the doorframe, blocking Grace's exit. You know how many applications we get for these positions? Dozens, maybe hundreds. Hard-working people, legal people, who would kill for this opportunity. And yet here you are, barely meeting minimum standards. Grace's hands shook as she wrung out her cleaning cloth. I'm doing my best, Mr. Coleman. If there's something specific you'd like me to improve, I'm happy to. Your best, Richard laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the bathroom tiles. Your best is making me have to constantly check your work. Your best is complaining about the schedule. Your best is showing up late. I was 2 minutes late today because the bus. I don't want to hear your excuses. Richard pushed off from the doorframe, and Grace instinctively took a step back, her hip hitting the edge of the sink. You know what? I think this bathroom needs to be redone. The sink isn't clean enough. Start over. Grace looked at the sink she had just spent 10 minutes scrubbing. It was spotless. The chrome fixtures gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Sir, did I ask for your opinion? Richard's voice had gone cold. I said start over. Or are you refusing a direct order from your supervisor? Grace felt tears building behind her eyes but forced them back. She couldn't cry, not in front of him, not where he could see her break. No, sir, I'll start over. That's what I thought. Richard took another sip of his coffee and walked away, leaving Grace alone in the bathroom. She waited until she heard his footsteps fade down the hallway before she allowed herself to lean against the wall. Her entire body was trembling. Not just from exhaustion now, but from humiliation, from rage, from the crushing weight of powerlessness. She thought about Marcus, lying in his hospital bed, fighting leukemia with a bravery that shattered her heart every time she saw him. She thought about the treatment he needed, the money she didn't have, the impossible math that kept her trapped in this cycle of abuse and exhaustion. God, why? She whispered, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. Why does it have to be so hard? I'm trying. I'm doing everything I can. Why isn't it enough? Why do people like him get to treat people like me this way? What did I do to deserve this? But there was no answer, just the hum of the fluorescent lights and the distant sound of Richard's laughter echoing from somewhere down the hallway. Grace wiped her eyes, took a shaky breath, and started cleaning the sink again. Because that's what she did. That's what she had always done. She endured. She survived. She kept going, even when every part of her wanted to collapse. By 11:53 p.m., Grace had finished the 17th floor and was making her final rounds, checking to make sure everything was perfect so Richard wouldn't have any excuse to write her up or dock her pay. Her vision was blurring at the edges, and she had developed a tremor in her hands that made it difficult to grip the handle of her mop. But she was almost done. Just 7 more minutes, and her shift would be over. She was pushing her cart toward the service elevator when Richard appeared one more time, materializing from the shadows like some nightmare that refused to end. He had something in his hand, a nearly empty coffee cup, and before Grace could process what was happening, he dumped the cold coffee directly onto the floor she had just finished mopping. The brown liquid spread across the white tiles in an ugly stain, coffee grounds settling into the corners she had meticulously cleaned. Grace stared at the mess, her mind refusing to accept what had just happened. Oops, Richard said, not even trying to hide his smirk. Looks like you missed a spot. Better clean that up before you leave. Can't have the morning crew thinking we're sloppy, can we? He walked away, whistling, leaving Grace standing in the hallway, with her mop and her cleaning supplies and her broken spirit. She looked at the spilled coffee, looked at the clock. 11:54 p.m. 6 minutes left in her shift. She could clean it in 6 minutes. She could do it. Grace bent down, and that's when her body finally gave out. The pain in her lower back suddenly exploded into something white-hot and all-consuming. Her knees buckled, her vision went completely black, and Grace Williams, mother of Marcus, fighter of impossible battles, collapsed onto the cold floor of the Westheimer Tower at 11:55 p.m. on a Tuesday night in Houston, Texas. The last thing she felt before losing consciousness was her hands touching the spilled coffee, still warm against her raw, bleeding skin. The last thing she thought was, I'm sorry, Marcus, I'm so sorry, I tried. And then there was only darkness. Grace didn't know how long she had been lying on that cold floor. Time had become something fluid and meaningless, stretching and contracting like a living thing. She was aware of pain, distant and muffled, as if her body belonged to someone else. She was aware of the chemical smell of cleaning solution mixing with spilled coffee. She was aware of voices, far away, echoing through the empty hallways of the Westheimer Tower. Grace, Grace, can you hear me? It was Robert, the night security guard, a kind-faced black man in his 60s who had worked in this building for 20 years. His voice sounded worried, urgent. Don't try to move, I'm calling an ambulance. No, Grace managed to whisper, the words scraping out of her throat like broken glass. No ambulance. Can't afford it. Grace, you collapsed. You need medical attention. Just help me up. Please, Robert. I just need to get up. Grace tried to push herself off the floor, but her arms wouldn't cooperate. Her whole body felt like it had been filled with concrete, heavy and unresponsive. You need help, Grace. Real help. Robert's voice was gentle but firm. How long have you been working like this? 3 jobs? 4? When's the last time you slept more than a couple hours? I can't remember, Grace admitted, tears leaking from the corners of her eyes. But Marcus needs his treatment. $8,000 by Friday, or they postpone it. If they postpone it, she couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't voice the fear that haunted her every waking moment. Robert was quiet for a long moment, then she heard him moving, heard the rustle of fabric. When she managed to open her eyes, she saw him taking off his security guard jacket and folding it to place under her head like a pillow. Let me at least get you some water, and you're not moving until you drink it and rest for a few minutes. Understood. Grace wanted to argue, wanted to tell him she needed to finish cleaning that spilled coffee, needed to punch out and catch the night bus home. But her body had mutinied against her will, and all she could do was nod weakly and close her eyes again. She must have drifted into some kind of half-sleep, because when she opened her eyes again, Robert was back with a bottle of water and something else, something that made Grace's breath catch in her throat. Standing behind Robert, partially hidden in the shadows of the hallway, was a man. Not just any man. There was something about his presence that made the air feel different, charged, like the moment before a summer storm breaks. Grace, Robert said softly, this gentleman appeared a few minutes ago. Said he was here to help. Grace's vision was still blurry, but as the man stepped forward into the fluorescent light, she could see him more clearly. He was dressed simply, almost anachronistically, in clothes that looked handmade, woven fabric of white and cream with a red sash across his shoulder. His hair was dark and long, his beard neatly trimmed, and his skin was brown like hers, the kind of brown that spoke of Mediterranean sun and ancient ancestry. But it was his eyes that captured Grace's attention. They were dark, impossibly deep, and when they looked at her, she felt seen in a way she had never experienced before. Not just seen on the surface, but known down to the very core of her soul. Grace Williams, the man said, and his voice was like water over smooth stones. Musical and peaceful, faithful servant, devoted mother, beloved daughter of God. Grace tried to sit up, confused and disoriented. Who are you? How do you know my name? The man smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made Grace feel like she had just come home after a lifetime of wandering. I have always known your name, Grace. I knew it before you were born. I have watched every tear you've cried, counted every sacrifice you've made, witnessed every moment of suffering you've endured. Sir, I don't understand, Grace said, her voice shaking. Are you from the hospital? Did someone send you? In a way, yes, the man replied, moving closer and kneeling beside her on the cold floor, seeming completely unbothered by the spilled coffee soaking into his simple clothes. But not the hospital you're thinking of. Grace, do you know who I am? Grace stared at him, her exhausted mind struggling to make sense of what was happening. There was something familiar about him, something that tugged at memories from childhood Sunday school classes, from her grandmother's stories, from the worn Bible she kept on her nightstand and barely had time to read anymore. You can't be, she whispered. That's not possible. Many things are possible that people have stopped believing in, the man said gently. He reached out and touched her hand, the one that was bleeding from the harsh cleaning chemicals, and Grace felt warmth spread from his fingers into her skin. Not just physical warmth, but something deeper, something that reached into the places where exhaustion and despair had taken root. Your faith has sustained you through 8 months of impossible trials, Grace. Did you think that faith went unnoticed? Jesus. The name came out as a question, as a prayer, as an impossibility that somehow felt like the only truth that made sense. Are you really? I am, he said simply. I have been with you every moment, Grace. When you scrubbed floors at the hospital, while Marcus was 3 floors above you, fighting for his life. When you smiled at rude customers at the Burger Palace, even though your feet were bleeding inside your shoes. When Richard humiliated you, degraded you, treated you as less than human. I was there, I saw it all, and I wept with you. Tears were streaming down Grace's face now, hot and unstoppable. Then why didn't you help me? Why didn't you stop it? Why does Marcus have to suffer? Why do people like Richard get to treat people like me like we're nothing? Where were you, Jesus? Where were you when I needed you? The man, Jesus, didn't flinch from her anger or her pain. Instead, he cupped her face gently in his hands, his thumbs wiping away her tears. I was carrying you, Grace. Every step you took, I was carrying you. Every burden you lifted, I was lifting it with you. And tonight I am here to remind Richard Coleman and everyone who has ever treated my children with cruelty that I see everything, and I respond to everything. As if summoned by the mention of his name, Richard appeared at the end of the hallway. He had his phone out, probably playing some game, and he looked annoyed to see the scene before him. What the hell is going on here? Grace, why are you still on the floor? And who is this? He gestured dismissively at Jesus. Visitors aren't allowed in the building after hours. Security, get him out of here. Robert looked uncomfortable, glancing between Richard and the stranger. Sir, I think this gentleman is I don't care who he is. Get him out now. Richard's voice was sharp, authoritarian, the voice of someone used to being obeyed without question. Jesus stood up slowly, gracefully, and turned to face Richard. The change in the atmosphere was immediate and palpable. The fluorescent lights flickered, the air grew heavy, and Richard, who had been striding forward with all his usual arrogance, suddenly stopped in his tracks as if he had walked into an invisible wall. Richard Andrew Coleman, Jesus said, his voice still gentle, but carrying an authority that made every word feel like it had physical weight. Son of Andrew and Margaret Coleman, born July 15, 1990 in Houston, Texas, graduated from Westside High School with mediocre grades, hired by Coleman Commercial Cleaning Services, not because of your qualifications, but because your uncle owns 30% of the company. Richard's face had gone pale. Who told you? You think I need to be told? Jesus took a step toward Richard, who instinctively took a step back. I was there on March 23, 2015. When you were pulled over for drunk driving and the officer let you go with a warning because you were white and polite and called him sir. I was there on November 8, 2018, when you were passed over for a promotion you didn't deserve, and you blamed it on affirmative actions instead of your own incompetence. I was there on January 4, 2023 when you first met Grace Williams, and immediately decided she was beneath you because of the color of her skin. I'm not racist, Richard stammered, his usual confidence crumbling. I treat everyone the same. Do you? Jesus's voice carried a edge now, sharp as a blade. When Tyler Mitchell, the white college student who works part-time, shows up late, you laugh it off. When Grace Williams, who works 22 hours a day to save her dying son, is 2 minutes late because of the bus, you threaten her job. When Christina Reynolds spills something, you say accidents happen. When Grace cleans a floor to perfection, and you spill coffee on it deliberately, you make her clean it again while you laugh. Richard's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. For the first time in his life, he had no clever comeback, no dismissive joke, no way to deflect or deny. But tonight, Jesus continued, his voice growing stronger, tonight you went too far. Tonight you broke something in Grace that I have been carefully, lovingly, miraculously holding together for 8 months. Tonight you took a woman who was already carrying more than any human should bear, and you deliberately added to her burden because it amused you, because you could, because in your small cruel mind, her suffering meant nothing. I was just doing my job, Richard whispered, making sure standards are met. No, Jesus said firmly, you were exercising power over someone who had none. You were punishing Grace for the color of her skin, for her poverty, for her desperation. You saw her vulnerability, and you exploited it, and you enjoyed it. The fluorescent lights flickered again, and in the unstable illumination, Jesus seemed to grow larger, his presence filling the hallway until it felt like the building itself was too small to contain him. Do you remember what I said, Richard? Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. Every time you humiliated Grace, you were humiliating me. Every time you made her redo perfect work, you were doing it to me. Every time you called her lazy, worthless, inferior, you were saying it to me. Richard collapsed to his knees, his phone clattering to the floor. I didn't know, he gasped. I didn't know it was you, but you should have known it mattered, Jesus replied. You should have known that Grace Williams, struggling mother, faithful servant, child of God, mattered. Her suffering should have mattered to you not because I was watching, but because she is human, because she is your sister. regardless of the color of her skin. Because her pain is real, her struggles are real, her son's life is real. Jesus knelt down in front of Richard, meeting him at eye level. You have been given so much, Richard. Opportunities that Grace never had. Second chances Grace would never receive. Benefit of the doubt that Grace is constantly denied. And you have used all of it to make yourself feel superior to people who are actually stronger, braver, and more faithful than you could ever imagine being. What are you going to do to me? Richard's voice was small, childlike, terrified. I'm going to give you something you don't deserve, Jesus said softly. I'm going to give you what I have given every human being since the beginning of time. I'm going to give you a choice. You can continue on the path you're on, using your privilege and power to crush others, justifying your cruelty with excuses and rationalizations, and you will find that path leads to a loneliness and emptiness that all your money and status can never fill.
Jesus paused, letting the weight of those words settle. Or you can choose differently. You can look at Grace Williams and see not someone beneath you, but someone who has taught you about real strength, about real sacrifice, about real faith. You can take the resources you've been given, the opportunities you've had, and use them to lift up instead of push down. You can become the man you were always meant to be instead of the man you've chosen to become. But I've been so awful, Richard sobbed, the reality of his actions finally breaking through years of denial and self-justification. How can I possibly make up for what I've done? You can't, Jesus said simply. The past is the past. You cannot undo Grace's suffering. You cannot give back the dignity you took from her. But you can choose right now in this moment to be different, to be better, to be mine. Jesus stood and returned to Grace, who had been watching the entire exchange with wide eyes. He helped her to her feet, and as he did, Grace felt strength returning to her body. The pain in her back faded. The exhaustion that had been crushing her for months lifted. Her bleeding hands stopped hurting. Grace, Jesus said, holding both of her hands in his. Your faith has sustained Marcus. Your prayers have already been answered. The treatment he needs will be provided. Every dollar will be accounted for. Every bill will be paid. You will not lose your son. How? Grace whispered. How is that possible? Because I am making it possible, Jesus replied. Because you trusted me even when I seemed silent. Because you kept going even when you wanted to give up. Because you loved Marcus with a love that reflects my own love for all of my children. Grace Williams, you are not alone. You have never been alone, and you will never be alone. He pulled her into an embrace, and Grace felt something break open inside her. All the fear, all the exhaustion, all the pain and anger and desperation that she had been holding inside for 8 months came pouring out in great heaving sobs. She cried into the chest of Jesus Christ, and he held her, rocked her gently, whispered words of comfort that her conscious mind couldn't quite hear but her soul understood perfectly. When Grace finally pulled back, wiping her eyes, she saw that Robert had also fallen to his knees, tears streaming down his face. Richard was still on the floor, head in his hands, his entire body shaking with remorse. The hallway of the Westheimer Tower, usually so sterile and cold, felt warm, alive, holy. What do I do now? Grace asked Jesus. How do I go forward from here? You rest, Jesus said with a smile. For the first time in 8 months you rest. You go home to Marcus. You hold him. You sleep. And tomorrow you will wake up to a new reality. The hospital will call with news about a mysterious donor who has paid Marcus's entire treatment in full. Coleman Commercial Cleaning will call to inform you that you've been promoted to day shift supervisor with a significant raise, and Richard Coleman will call to apologize and to offer to pay for Marcus's future treatments as an act of restitution. Grace looked at Richard, who had raised his head and was nodding frantically through his tears. I will, Richard said hoarsely. I swear I will. I'll sell my car if I have to. I'll do whatever it takes. I'm so sorry, Grace. I'm so sorry. You are forgiven, Grace heard herself say, and she was surprised to find that she meant it. The anger that had been burning in her chest was gone, replaced by something that felt like peace. We all need second chances, Richard. I pray you use yours well. Jesus looked at all three of them, at Grace, at Robert, at Richard, and his expression was one of profound love mixed with something that might have been satisfaction. This is why I came, he said, not to condemn but to redeem, not to destroy but to restore, not to punish but to transform. Richard, you will spend the rest of your life making amends for the harm you've caused, not because you fear hell, but because you finally understand heaven. He turned to Robert.
And you, faithful watchman, you will tell this story. People will doubt you, mock you, call you crazy, but you will tell it anyway, because there are thousands of others like Grace out there, working impossible hours, fighting impossible battles, wondering if anyone sees their suffering, and they need to know that someone does. They need to know that I do. Robert nodded solemnly. I'll tell it, Lord. I'll tell everyone who will listen. And Grace, Jesus said, turning back to her one final time, Grace, beloved daughter, you will live to see Marcus grow up. You will see him graduate high school. You will see him go to college. You will see him become a doctor, and he will dedicate his life to treating leukemia patients who can't afford care. Your suffering will not be wasted. Your faith will bear fruit that feeds thousands. The pain you endured will become purpose that transforms lives. Thank you, Grace whispered, fresh tears streaming down her face. Thank you, Jesus, for seeing me, for not forgetting me, for being here. I am always here, Jesus replied. Even when you cannot see me, even when you cannot feel me, even when you think I have abandoned you, I am here. I am in the hands of the nurse who was extra gentle when drawing Marcus's blood. I am in the smile of the bus driver who waited an extra 30 seconds so you wouldn't miss your connection. I am in the elderly woman who prayed for you at the bus stop. I am in Robert's kindness. I am even in Richard's potential for change. He stepped back, and as he did, the light in the hallway seemed to grow brighter, more golden, until Grace had to shield her eyes. Go home, Grace. Go home to your son. And remember this night. Remember that heaven is never as far away as it seems. Remember that justice, real justice, divine justice, is never forgotten. And remember that love, sacrificial love, mother's love, God's love, is the most powerful force in the universe. When Grace's eyes adjusted and she could see clearly again, Jesus was gone, not disappeared in some dramatic flash, but simply no longer there, as if he had never been, except the warmth remained, the peace remained, the certainty that everything he had said was true remained. Grace looked at Richard, who was slowly getting to his feet. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, a understanding that transcended words. He had been given a second chance. She had been given vindication. They had both been given grace. I'll drive you home, Richard said quietly. It's the least I can do. Grace nodded, accepting the offer not because she needed it, but because she understood that Richard needed to give it, needed to begin the long process of becoming someone different than who he had been. As they walked to the elevator together, Grace pulled out her phone and saw a text message from the hospital, time-stamped at exactly midnight. Marcus's treatment has been fully funded by an anonymous donor. No payment required. Proceed with scheduled treatment tomorrow. Congratulations, Mrs. Williams. Grace pressed the phone to her chest and whispered another prayer, this one of pure gratitude. Thank you, God. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you for not forgetting us. The elevator doors opened, and Grace Williams, who had collapsed in exhaustion and despair just an hour ago, stepped inside with her head held high, and hope burning bright in her heart for the first time in 8 months. The transformation had begun.
3 months had passed since that miraculous night at the Westheimer Tower, and Grace Williams stood in the waiting room of the MD Anderson Cancer Center, her hands clasped together in prayer, her heart beating with a rhythm that alternated between hope and terror. Today was the day. Today they would find out if Marcus's treatment had worked, if the leukemia was in remission, if her son would live to see his 13th birthday. Mrs. Williams, Doctor. Patricia Chen appeared in the doorway, her expression carefully neutral in that way doctors had perfected over years of delivering both devastating and miraculous news. We have Marcus's test results. Would you like to come back? Grace stood, her legs feeling weak despite the 3 months of actual rest she had been getting. So much had changed since that night. So much that sometimes Grace woke up wondering if it had all been a fever dream, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion and desperation. But then she would look at her bank account, see the zeros that had appeared there, read the email from Coleman Commercial Cleaning confirming her new position as day shift supervisor at $17 an hour, and she would know it had been real. Jesus had been real. The miracle had been real. She followed Dr. Chen down the hallway, past the familiar rooms where Marcus had spent so many hours receiving chemotherapy, past the nurse's station where the staff had learned her name and her story. Grace had quit 2 of her 3 jobs. She still worked at the hospital during the day, but now in a supervisory role with better hours and better pay. The Burger Palace was a memory. The night shift at Westheimer Tower was a memory.
She slept 6 hours a night now, sometimes 7. She ate real meals. She had time to sit with Marcus and help him with his homework, time to pray without falling asleep mid-sentence, time to be a mother instead of just a provider. Richard Coleman had kept his word. Every single promise Jesus had extracted from him that night, he had fulfilled. The mysterious anonymous donor who had paid for Marcus's treatment, that had been Richard, liquidating his savings account, selling his expensive car, taking out a loan against his inheritance. He had called Grace, the day after their encounter, his voice shaking, and apologized for 2 straight hours. Not the performative apology of someone trying to avoid consequences, but the genuine remorse of someone who had looked into the mirror of their own soul and been horrified by what they saw. But Richard hadn't stopped at apologies. He had shown up at the hospital 1 week later and asked if he could visit Marcus. Grace had been hesitant, protective, but something in Richard's face, some fundamental change in his demeanor, had convinced her to say yes. That first visit had been awkward, painful even, with Richard sitting stiffly in the chair beside Marcus's bed, struggling to find words that could possibly bridge the chasm between his former cruelty and his current repentance. But Marcus, in the way that children sometimes understand grace better than adults, had simply asked, "Do you want to play cards?" And Richard, this man who had spent years looking down on people like Grace and Marcus, had said yes. They played Go Fish for an hour, and when Richard left, he had tears in his eyes. That had been the first visit of many. Richard came every week, sometimes twice a week, bringing books for Marcus, puzzles, board games. He never came empty-handed, but more importantly, he never came with the arrogance that had once defined him. He had started volunteering at the hospital, working in the pediatric cancer ward, reading to children whose parents had to work multiple jobs and couldn't always be there. He had donated money, significant money, to create a fund for families who couldn't afford treatment. He had become impossibly, a force for good. Grace reached Dr. Chen's office and sat down in the chair across from the desk, her hands gripping the armrest so tightly her knuckles turned pale. "Please," she whispered, "please tell me it worked, Doctor." Chen sat down, pulled up Marcus's file on her computer, and then did something Grace had never seen her do before. She smiled. Not a polite professional smile, but a genuine, radiant, joyful smile. "Grace, I've been an oncologist for 23 years. I've seen thousands of cases, delivered hundreds of diagnoses, witnessed outcomes that defied all medical explanation. But this," she turned the computer screen toward Grace, "this is the most complete remission I have ever seen in a patient with Marcus's initial prognosis. The cancer is gone, not just reduced, not just manageable, gone. Every test, every scan, every blood marker, clean." The words didn't register at first. Grace heard them, but they seemed to bounce off some protective barrier her mind had erected to guard against disappointment. "Gone," she repeated. You mean he's in complete remission," Dr. Chen confirmed. "Now, we'll need to continue monitoring him closely for the next 5 years. There's always a possibility of recurrence. But Grace, his numbers are better than we dared hope. His body responded to the treatment in ways that honestly, from a purely medical standpoint, I cannot fully explain. If I believed in miracles," she trailed off, then shook her head with a small laugh. "Actually, you know what, I think I do believe in miracles, because this is one." Grace's vision blurred with tears. Her hands came up to cover her mouth as a sound emerged from her throat, something between a laugh and a sob. Pure emotion that couldn't be contained or categorized. "Can I see him? Can I tell him? He's waiting in the playroom. We wanted to tell you first, give you a moment to process. But yes, absolutely, go tell your son that he's going to live." Grace stood on shaking legs and moved toward the door, then stopped and turned back. "Dr. Chen, I need you to know something. 3 months ago I met someone who told me that Marcus would live, that every dollar would be accounted for, that my faith would be rewarded. I didn't tell you because I thought you'd think I was crazy. Maybe I was crazy, but he was right. About everything. Jesus was right about everything." Dr. Chen's expression softened. "Grace, I'm a woman of science. I trust in empirical evidence, in peer-reviewed studies, in treatments that can be measured and replicated. But I'm also human. And I have seen too many things in this hospital, too many outcomes that defy scientific explanation, to dismiss faith entirely. If Jesus told you Marcus would live, and Marcus is living, then who am I to question that? Maybe science and faith aren't opposites. Maybe they're both ways of describing the same miracles. Grace hugged the doctor, surprising both of them, then practically ran down the hallway toward the playroom. She burst through the door, and there he was, Marcus, her son, her reason for breathing, for fighting, for enduring 8 months of impossible hardship. He was sitting at a table working on a puzzle, his bald head covered by a Houston Rockets cap that Richard had brought him, his face still thin from months of treatment, but his eyes, his beautiful brown eyes, bright and alert and alive. Mom. Marcus looked up, startled by her dramatic entrance. Are you okay? What did the doctor say? Grace crossed the room in 3 strides, and pulled Marcus into her arms. Holding him so tightly he squawked in protest. You're okay, she whispered into his shoulder. Baby, you're okay. The cancer is gone. You're in remission. You're going to live, Marcus. You're going to live. Marcus pulled back to look at his mother's face, searching for confirmation that this wasn't a cruel joke or a mistake. Really? Like really, Grace confirmed, tears streaming down her face. Doctor, Chen said it's the most complete remission she's ever seen. You beat it, baby. You beat leukemia. Marcus's face went through a series of expressions: shock, disbelief, hope, and then finally, joy. Pure, uncomplicated, childlike joy. He started laughing, a sound Grace hadn't heard in months, and then he was crying too, and they were both laughing and crying and holding each other in the middle of the hospital playroom, while a volunteer in the corner wiped her own eyes and smiled. I told you God wouldn't let me die yet, Marcus said when he could finally speak again. Remember, I told you I knew I was going to be okay because you prayed for me every single day, and Mom's prayers are like super powerful with God. Grace laughed through her tears. Where did you hear that? Mr. Richard told me. He said that when moms pray for their kids, God listens extra close because mom's love is the closest thing to God's love that exists on earth. Marcus paused. Mr. Richard says a lot of smart stuff now. He's different than how you described him from before. Yes, Grace agreed softly. He's very different. People can change, Marcus. When they meet Jesus, really meet him, they can become completely new people. Mr. Richard is proof of that. Is that what happened to him? He met Jesus, Marcus asked with the directness of a 12-year-old who hadn't yet learned that some questions were supposed to remain unspoken. Grace hesitated, then decided her son deserved the truth. Yes, baby, he met Jesus. We both did. The night I collapsed at work, Jesus came. He was real, Marcus. As real as you and me. He touched my hands and healed them. He spoke to Mr. Richard and changed his heart. And he promised me that you would live. And look at you. You're living. Marcus absorbed this information with remarkable calm. Cool, he said finally. Do you think I'll get to meet Jesus too someday? I think you meet him every day, Grace replied. Every time someone shows you kindness. Every time you feel loved. Every time something good happens that shouldn't have been possible. That's Jesus, baby. He's everywhere, even when we can't see him. The door to the playroom opened and a familiar figure appeared. Richard Coleman, no longer in expensive designer clothes but in simple jeans and a volunteer t-shirt, carrying a wrapped present and wearing an expression of nervous hope. Grace, I saw Dr. Chen in the hallway. She told me the news. I hope it's okay that I came. I wanted to. I needed to. He stopped, his voice breaking. It's okay, Grace said gently. Come in. Richard approached slowly, then knelt down so he was at eye level with Marcus. Hey champ, I heard you beat cancer's butt. That's pretty awesome. Marcus grinned. I told you I would. You owe me $5. We bet, remember? Richard laughed, pulled out his wallet and solemnly handed Marcus a $5 bill. Best money I ever lost. Here, I brought you something. He handed over the wrapped present. Marcus tore off the paper with the enthusiasm of a child who had been given too many medical procedures and not enough normal childhood moments. Inside was a leather-bound journal with Marcus's name embossed on the cover. Whoa, this is so cool. It's for writing your story, Richard explained. Because what you went through, Marcus, what your mom went through, what happened to all of us, that's a story worth remembering, worth recording. Worth sharing. Someday you're going to help other kids who are scared and sick and don't know if they'll make it. And this story, your story, is going to give them hope. Marcus flipped through the blank pages, his face serious now. Mr. Richard, can I ask you something? Anything, buddy. My mom said you used to be really mean to her. She said you made her life really hard when she was just trying to help me. Why did you do that? The room went silent. Grace tensed, ready to intervene if necessary. But Richard held up a hand. That's a fair question, Marcus. And you deserve an honest answer. He took a deep breath. I was mean to your mom because I was scared. That probably doesn't make sense, right? How could someone like me, someone with money and power, be scared of someone like your mom who had neither? Marcus shook his head. That doesn't make sense. You're right, it doesn't. But here's the thing, Marcus. Your mom has something I never had. She has real strength, real courage, real faith. She worked 3 jobs, slept 2 hours a night, endured humiliation and exhaustion and pain, all because she loved you so much. And that kind of love, that kind of strength, it terrified me, because it showed me how weak I was, how selfish, how empty my life was despite having so much. Richard's eyes were wet now, but he continued. So I tried to make myself feel bigger by making your mom feel smaller. I tried to convince myself I was better than her by treating her like she was less than me. And I was wrong, Marcus. So completely, horribly wrong. Your mom is one of the strongest, bravest, most incredible people I've ever met, and I'm spending the rest of my life trying to become even a fraction of the person she already is. Marcus looked at his mother, then back at Richard. Did you say sorry? About 1,000 times. But I'll say it again. Grace, I'm sorry. I'm so deeply, truly sorry for everything I did to you. I forgive you, Richard, Grace said. And she meant it more now than she had 3 months ago. Forgiveness, she had learned, wasn't a single moment but a process, a choice she had to make over and over again. And I'm proud of the man you're becoming. Richard wiped his eyes and stood. I should let you two celebrate. Marcus, you're the man of the house now. You take care of your mom, okay? She's been taking care of you for 12 years. Your turn to return the favor. I will, Marcus promised solemnly. I'm going to be strong like her. After Richard left, Grace and Marcus sat together in the playroom for another hour, not talking much, just being present with each other, processing the magnitude of what had just happened. Marcus was going to live. The nightmare that had consumed their lives for 8 months was over. They had survived. Eventually they left the hospital and took the bus home, but this time Grace wasn't rushing to make it to another job. This time she could sit beside her son, hold his hand, watch the Houston skyline pass by outside the window, and simply be grateful. Grateful for every breath, every heartbeat, every moment she got to spend with Marcus. When they arrived at their modest apartment in the 3rd ward, Grace was surprised to see people waiting outside. Robert, the security guard, was there, and several women from her church, and neighbors from the building, and even some of Grace's co-workers from the hospital. Someone had made a banner that read "Marcus beat cancer," and someone else had brought balloons, and someone else had made a cake. How did you all know? Grace asked, overwhelmed. Richard called us, explained Sister Patricia from church. He said today was the day, and we wanted to be here to celebrate with you. Grace Williams, you have carried us all in your prayers for years. Today we carry you in celebration. The impromptu party lasted for hours. People shared food and stories and laughter. Children played in the courtyard while adults talked and cried happy tears. Marcus was the center of attention, reveling in the normalcy of being celebrated for something good instead of being pitied for something terrible. And Grace, for the first time in longer than she could remember, felt part of a community instead of isolated by her struggles. As the sun began to set and people started heading home, Robert approached Grace. Can I tell you something? He asked quietly. Of course. That night at the Westheimer Tower, when Jesus appeared, I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. I've been telling everyone who will listen, just like he told me to. And you know what's amazing? People believe me. Not everyone, but enough. Enough that they're starting to look at the world differently. Starting to see that maybe miracles still happen. Maybe God still shows up. Maybe faith still matters. Grace squeezed his hand. Thank you for being there that night, Robert. Thank you for calling for help. Thank you for being a witness. Thank you for showing me what real faith looks like, Robert replied. Grace, I've been a Christian my whole life. Went to church every Sunday, sang in the choir, knew all the Bible verses. But watching you these past months, seeing how you trusted God even when everything was falling apart, that taught me more about faith than 60 years of Sunday school ever did. After everyone left, and Marcus was asleep in his bed, exhausted but happy, Grace sat alone in her small living room and opened her Bible for the first time in months. Not because she felt obligated, but because she wanted to, needed to. Wanted to spend time with the God who had saved her son, who had transformed her enemy, who had carried her through the impossible. She flipped through the pages randomly and landed on Isaiah 43. Her eyes found verse 2. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and when you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned, the flames will not set you ablaze. Grace read the words again slowly, letting them sink deep into her spirit. She had passed through waters that should have drowned her. She had walked through fire that should have consumed her. But she had not been swept away. She had not been burned, because God had been with her, every single moment, even when she couldn't feel his presence. Her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Richard. Thank you for letting me be part of Marcus's miracle. Seeing him healthy today reminded me why I was put on this earth, not to accumulate wealth or power, but to serve, to love, to be Jesus's hands and feet. You changed my life, Grace. You and Marcus in that night when heaven touched earth. I'll never be the same. Grace typed back, none of us will ever be the same, and that's exactly how it should be. See you next week at the hospital. She set down her phone and walked quietly into Marcus's room. Her son was sleeping peacefully, his chest rising and falling with steady breaths, his face relaxed in a way it hadn't been for months. Grace knelt beside his bed, placed her hand gently on his head and prayed. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you for hearing my prayers. Thank you for seeing my struggle. Thank you for carrying me when I couldn't walk. Thank you for healing my son. Thank you for transforming Richard. Thank you for reminding me that you are real, you are here, and you are good. I don't know what the future holds, but I know who holds the future, and that's enough. That will always be enough. She stayed there for a long time, kneeling beside her son's bed, feeling the presence of God fill her small apartment like warm light, and in that moment, Grace Williams understood something profound. The miracle wasn't just Marcus's healing. The miracle wasn't just Richard's transformation. The miracle wasn't just the money, or the job, or the relief from impossible burdens. The real miracle was that through all of it, through 8 months of suffering that should have destroyed her faith had somehow grown stronger. The real miracle was that she had been broken open by pain, and what had poured out wasn't bitterness, but love. The real miracle was that she had been tested by fire, and instead of being consumed, she had been refined into something stronger, purer, more beautiful. 6 months later, Grace stood in front of a congregation at her church, sharing her testimony. Marcus sat in the front row, healthy and whole, his hair growing back in soft curls. Richard sat beside him, no longer the cruel boss but a friend, a brother in Christ, a living example of redemption. Robert was there, and Dr. Chen had even come, curious despite her scientific skepticism. The church was packed, standing room only, people who had heard about the woman who met Jesus in an office building, and wanted to hear the story for themselves. Grace spoke for 30 minutes, telling every detail, the 3 jobs, the exhaustion, the humiliation, the collapse, and then the appearance of Jesus. She didn't soften the hard parts or exaggerate the miraculous parts. She simply told the truth. When she finished, the church was silent for a long moment. Then someone in the back started clapping, then someone else, then the entire congregation was on their feet, not applauding Grace, but applauding God, celebrating the goodness of a God who sees the suffering of his children and responds, who enters into the darkest places of human experience and brings light, who transforms hearts, heals bodies, and restores hope. After the service, dozens of people approached Grace with their own stories of struggles and miracles, of prayers answered in unexpected ways, of moments when they too had encountered the divine in the midst of ordinary life. Grace listened to each one, prayed with each person, reminded them that they were not alone, that God had not forgotten them, that their faith mattered. One woman, an older black lady, who reminded Grace of her grandmother, grabbed her hands and said, "Baby, you don't know what your story means to people like us. Black women who work 3 jobs, mothers who sacrifice everything, people who feel invisible, forgotten, less than. You reminded us that God sees us, that our struggles matter, that justice, real divine justice, is never forgotten. Thank you. Thank you for being brave enough to tell the truth." Grace hugged the woman and whispered, "We're not invisible. We never were. Jesus said whatever we do to the least of these, we do to him. That means every single person who has ever looked down on us, dismissed us, exploited us. They were actually doing it to Jesus himself, and Jesus doesn't forget. He doesn't ignore. He shows up. Maybe not on our timeline, but he shows up. That night, Grace wrote in her own journal, the one she had started keeping after Marcus's remission. She wrote about the day, about sharing her testimony, about the people who had been encouraged, and then she wrote something that would become her life's mission. I used to think my suffering was meaningless, random bad luck, punishment for sins I couldn't identify, but now I understand. My suffering was never wasted. Every tear I cried watered seeds that are now growing into something beautiful. Every prayer I whispered in desperation was heard and answered. Every moment I wanted to give up but didn't was building a testimony that would encourage thousands. This is what resurrection looks like. Not just coming back from death, but coming back transformed, purified, stronger. This is what grace looks like. Not the absence of hardship, but the presence of God in the midst of hardship. And this is what I want to spend the rest of my life, sharing the message that you are seen, you are loved, you are not forgotten, and your story matters. 10 years later, Marcus Williams graduated from medical school at the top of his class, his specialty, pediatric oncology, his mission, treating children with leukemia, whose families couldn't afford care, and standing in the audience, crying tears of joy, was his mother Grace, now the director of patient advocacy at MD Anderson Cancer Center. Beside her was Richard Coleman, who had become a major philanthropist funding cancer research and treatment programs. And somewhere in the hospital chapel, if you listened carefully, you might hear the echo of prayers offered by a woman who once worked 22 hours a day and met Jesus in an office building at 3 a.m. The story of Grace Williams became legend in Houston's black churches, whispered among cleaning staff at hospitals, shared in break rooms at fast food restaurants. It became a reminder that God sees the invisible, hears the voiceless, and never ever forgets his children. It became proof that miracles still happen, that transformation is possible, that faith is never wasted. And on quiet nights when Grace couldn't sleep, she would sometimes stand by Marcus's bedroom door and watch him breathe, healthy and whole, and she would remember that night. The fluorescent lights, the spilled coffee, the collapse, and then the appearance of a man in simple clothes with eyes that saw everything, who spoke her name like a blessing, who promised her that she was not alone. "Thank you, Jesus," she would whisper into the darkness. "For every moment, for every struggle, for every miracle. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for saving us. Thank you for proving that love, real sacrificial love, can change the world." And in the silence that followed, Grace Williams, once the most invisible woman in Houston, now a beacon of hope for thousands, would feel that familiar presence, not dramatic or overwhelming, but gentle and steady. The presence of a God who had never left, who had carried her through the fire, and who would continue carrying her, and everyone like her, until the day when all tears would be wiped away, all injustices corrected, and all faith rewarded. This was the harvest of faith. This was the fruit of perseverance. This was the proof that even in the darkest night, dawn was always coming, and it was beautiful. The end. This story shakes me to my core every single time I share it. Grace Williams represents millions of invisible people in America. Black mothers working multiple jobs, single parents sacrificing everything, people treated as less than human simply because of their skin color or economic status, people who society has decided don't matter. But here's the truth that Richard Coleman learned the hard way: every person matters to God. Every single one. When you humiliate a struggling mother, you're humiliating Christ himself. When you exploit someone's desperation, you're exploiting Jesus. When you look down on someone because of their race or poverty, you're looking down on the God who created them in his image. What strikes me most about Grace's story is her unwavering faith. 8 months of working 22 hours a day, 8 months of bleeding hands and exhausted body, 8 months of racist abuse from her boss. And she never stopped praying, never stopped believing, never stopped believing, never stopped trusting that God saw her suffering. That kind of faith doesn't come from comfort. It comes from being refined by fire. And Richard's transformation, that's the gospel in action. A man filled with racism and cruelty encounters Jesus and becomes completely new. Not gradually, not over years of therapy, but instantly when confronted with divine truth. He went from throwing coffee on floors to make Grace clean them again, to selling his car to pay for Marcus's cancer treatment. That's the power of meeting Jesus face to face. But the miracle isn't just Marcus's healing or Richard's transformation. The miracle is that Grace's suffering wasn't wasted. 10 years later, Marcus became a pediatric oncologist, helping children whose families can't afford treatment. Grace became director of patient advocacy, fighting for people like her former self. Richard became a philanthropist funding cancer research. One encounter with Jesus created ripples that saved thousands of lives. This is what resurrection looks like in real life. Not just coming back from death, but being transformed by suffering into something more beautiful, more powerful, more purposeful. Grace could have become bitter. She had every right to hate Richard, to hate God, to hate the system that failed her. But instead she chose forgiveness. She chose faith. She chose to believe that God had a plan even when everything seemed hopeless. And here's what I need you to understand. Grace's story is still happening right now. Right this moment, there's a single mother working 3 jobs to save her sick child. There's a black woman being humiliated by her boss and staying silent because she needs the paycheck. There's someone on their knees at 3 a.m., wondering if God even sees their suffering. If that's you, this story is Jesus's message to you. I see you. I've always seen you. Your tears are counted. Your sacrifices are recorded. Your faith is noticed, and your breakthrough is coming. Maybe not on your timeline, but it's coming. Keep going. Keep praying. Keep believing. Dawn is coming. Have you ever felt invisible like Grace? Have you ever worked so hard that your body broke but you kept going because someone depended on you? Have you ever experienced racism or discrimination that made you feel less than human? Have you ever met someone who transformed completely like Richard did? Share your story in the comments. Your testimony might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if Grace's story touched your heart, share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that God sees them, that their struggle matters, and that miracles still happen. What part of this story impacted you most? Was it Grace's faith, Richard's transformation, Marcus's healing, or Jesus's appearance? Tell us in the comments below.